Tonight, chaos at the heart of British politics. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is fighting for his political life, following calls from within his own party to resign, amid a mounting scandal that's shaken his government to its core. With senior aides resigning, leadership rivals circling, and his authority under fire, the UK Prime Minister is vowing he's not prepared to walk away. So we ask, is Keir Starmer clinging to power, or is his premiership unravelling before our eyes? Let's debate the fallout and what it means for Labour, for the UK, and for the future of this government. Stay with us for the debate with me, Catalina Marchand d'Abreu. A controversy that won't go away. Sir Keir Starmer is under intense pressure after fresh calls for his resignation. Pressure he's flatly rejected, insisting he won't walk away. At the heart of the row is the former British ambassador to the US, Lord Peter Mandelson. Starmer admits he was aware of Mandelson's past associations with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein when he was appointed ambassador, yet insists there was no wrongdoing on his end. Senior figures have raised concerns about his judgment, leadership, and trust, while Labour faces a growing political headache at a critical moment. Starmer says staying on is about doing the right thing, but critics say the damage is already done. So let me start here. Can Sir Keir Starmer survive this controversy and cling on to power? Or has his judgment, or lack of thereof, already failed him? Coming up next on Counterpoints. Joining us to debate the latest developments in the UK is Paul Richards, a Labour speech writer and commentator who serves as treasurer of the Fabian Society. John McTernan, former political secretary to Prime Minister Tony Blair, and now a senior advisor to global PR agency Burson, and James Schneider, who is the communications director for Progressive International and also a former advisor to then Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar became the most senior Labour voice so far, calling for Starmer's resignation. Sarwar said too many mistakes have been made in Downing Street and that it was a time for a change. Labour MPs and cabinet ministers rallied around the Prime Minister yesterday evening, but there is no doubt that his leadership has been perhaps fatally weakened. Starmer's approval ratings have crashed to around -50, historically low for a UK leader. So we're going to start with you, Paul. So when the majority of voters disapprove of his performance, and now with the leadership crisis linked to the Epstein files, how can staying really be the right thing to do?
Well, the answer is that we don't elect our prime ministers through opinion polls. We choose a candidate in our constituency, and whichever party gets the most MPs in the parliament gets to choose its leader. And the Labour Party has chosen and then reinforced this week at the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting its support for Keir Starmer. So he is the Prime Minister, and he's in a stronger position this week than he was a few days ago because of this overwhelming support he's had from his members of parliament and also members of his cabinet, and I would argue too members of his party.
John, what do you think here? Because Starmer does insist that leadership change isn't in the national interest, especially in a time of instability in the country. Isn't keeping him in place the responsible choice?
I think the one thing that I challenge about what Paul has just said is that democratic mandates in modern politics are not once every 5 years. They're renewed every day. They're renewed every hour. They're renewed by your actions. They're renewed by your intentions. And so it's not wrong to keep an eye on the opinion polls. It's not wrong to say Labour got a landslide 18, 20 months ago, and its support in the polls has almost halved. That is a big issue. I don't know how far it has to go to become an issue that Paul thinks has to be responded to. It's got to be responded to. For me, the issue is not the leader, it's not the faces, it's not the voices, it's the policies, it's the politics. And there's something paradoxical about the fact that the most unpopular things the Labour Party has done, whether it is taking away winter fuel payments from pensioners or whether it's appointing Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, the most unpopular things weren't in the manifesto. So I say, go back to Labour's Radical Manifesto, and then let's see how far we can go with the Prime Minister then. Yeah, he's got the backing of the Parliamentary Party. Yes, he's got the backing of the Cabinet. And yes, he's got the backing of the leadership of the party in the National Executive Committee. But it's for some things to do something with it. Go back to the Radical Manifesto and do that faster.
So what do you think, John? Should he resign?
No, there's no point in resigning when you've not been asked to resign. That's in politics. While you've got power, use it. And that's the question that hangs over the government at the moment, is what's it going to do? And I think you need to get through this moment as quickly as possible, publish all those emails as quickly as possible, make clear what messages were given to ministers and advisors at whatever level by Peter Mandelson, and then look at who may have to resign. I think there will be some resignations. Do that quickly, have a reshuffle to fill the top team and the team at all levels with talent. But while you have got the backing, use the backing. So I come back to, do the house building that you promised that's stalled. Do the things you promised that are stalled.
And James, when your own party leaders warned that your leadership is damaging Labour's brand, as did the Scottish Labour leader, and giving space to the Reform Party, as he said, shouldn't Keir Starmer listen?
I think he should listen in as much that there is a desperate need to change direction. I agree with quite a lot of what John just said, and I do think that Keir Starmer's leadership is driving the party into the ground, but that's not because he is a uniquely bad politician. It's because of the policies that they're carrying out. And I think if he takes, what Paul said about him being in a stronger position now on this Tuesday than last week, I think is probably correct. He has a small bit of breathing room, maybe only as long as 2 weeks until the by-election in Gorton and Denton. And he really has to use that. And I think he has to use that to show there's going to be a change of political direction. You know, it's all very well and good saying, I'm here fighting for the country, I'm on your side. You have to fill that in with some content, which means you also have to show who you're against. And Peter Mandelson, in this case, is potentially fantastic foil, because he represents the complete corporate capture of British politics and a project to make the Labour Party not a vehicle for the overwhelming majority of people, but say for the sorts of people that Peter Mandelson had in his client list of his company, Global Counsel. Now, that means that I think the government needs to pick fights loudly on the side of British people against vested interests. I would like to see them bringing forward very quickly now saying that they're going to look at the public ownership of water immediately, banning second jobs for MPs, abolishing the House of Lords, looking at a wealth tax on the super rich. I think if they came out with these things very quickly and showed that there was a different sense of political direction, not just a few backroom personnel, then maybe people would give it another look.
Paul, what do you think? Do you think, as Keir Starmer has been warned, that perhaps his leadership has been damaging the Labour brand?
No, I don't think so. And I think the crisis over the last few days has been a bit of a Rorschach test, and people can see in those patterns the things they probably believed in advance of that. So if they've got a particular policy agenda they want to pursue, then the answer to the crisis is to pursue that. If they didn't like Keir Starmer in the first place, then swapping him out for somebody they prefer is the answer. But I mean, all of these things are just wish projection, aren't they? And I think Starmer, when I say he's in a stronger position, I think that for two reasons. One is the Labour Party in the UK finds it hard to swap its leaders with any great alacrity, unlike the Conservative Party, who can do it quite swiftly. And secondly, unlike the time when I was an advisor, there was Tony Blair in government and then Gordon Brown as Chancellor sort of waiting in the wings as the obvious successor. There is no obvious successor now in the UK. We could, between us, probably cook up 6, 7, 8 names of potential successors, but there isn't a single person with the 80 MPs needed to trigger a leadership contest, and certainly not the broader support in the party and the trade union. So there isn't an obvious successor to Keir Starmer, which puts him in an even stronger position. Now, that may change, and, none of us is gazing in a crystal ball, but I would say that for now, and certainly through this year, I suspect that's the situation that will remain. Now, John McTernan's point about the policy, I think, is well made, because the whole house of cards is built on economic growth. This is the classic social democratic approach, which unless you get growth in the economy, you can't spend money on the things that people want. And that includes the public services and the infrastructure and the rest of it. So that's the true test. It's not the popularity ratings of the leader, but the economic factors, and is there growth coming into the economy? And at the moment, it's very sclerotic and slow. And that's the only litmus test really for this government, is can it get those numbers up?
John, what do you think? Do you think that Keir Starmer has come out of this stronger, that his determination has actually given him a fresh chance?
I don't think you can claim he's stronger. He's gone through the fire, he's survived. He's definitely been tempered by that. And the question is whether he can actually embrace his own politics. He's from the soft left of the party. That's where he was in the 20s and the 30s. That's where he was when he was a lawyer. That's where he was when Ed Miliband was leader and invited Keir to stand as a parliamentary candidate. It was indeed Keir Starmer who was the last man standing, fighting to retain the very, very large green transition programme. The £28 billion of investment in green transition should have been an incredibly strong investment in industrial strategy. So there's a politics there, and I think Keir's mistakes have been by and large when he's actually outsourced his judgment. He should have his own view on the economy. It shouldn't only be the Chancellor that has one. He should have his own view on what's right and wrong in welfare. I don't believe for a minute that he was in favour of pushing more kids into poverty, yet that was the effect of the policy that Treasury and the DWP had over not lifting the 2-child limit. So I think, it's let the man be the politician he really wants to be. And, is he stronger? No. Has he learned? Yes, I'm sure he's learned. Does it give him a push? Yes. Does it push him towards the right thing? That is the question. It's the policies and not the personalities. It's the speed with which he addresses these things that really matters, because he's only got between now and May the 7th to really show a difference.
James, what do you think? Stronger or not? Has he survived? John says he survived the turmoil. Critics say his days are counted. What do you think?
I think he has definitely survived for 16 days. He definitely has 16 days, and then that's the next point of maximum danger. And that is stronger than where he was at the weekend, because then you would probably say he didn't have 16 days, he had closer to 16 hours, and he survived that little bit. But I really strongly agree with what John said, that now the question for him is, can he grasp this small window? I think it's unlikely that he has in his repertoire the sorts of soft left things that John hopes that he has. I think we've seen in 6 years of his leadership driven more and more towards reaction and corporate capture. But I would love it if he were able to show a little bit of basic for the many, not the few type of politics, and to act when you're talking about growth in the economy, as Paul does, what we should be talking about is growth in living standards. Is he going to do things which, again, shows on the side of the overwhelming majority of people? And I'm just going back to water, public ownership of water, because it's such a complete no-brainer that has the vast majority of the public in support of that. That's a thing that may or may not do anything for growth, but it could stop money leaching out to private shareholders, many of whom are in tax havens, and potentially put more money in the pockets of ordinary people. That may be good for growth. It may not be good for growth, but it is definitely good for people's living standards, and it's the sort of thing that you could do that there would be lots of loud squealing about. If they are going to if they're going to show which side they are on, if Keir Starmer is going to finally show that he's on the side of the overwhelming majority, there are going to be some elite interests that will hate that. And that should actually be a good thing. I don't think that they should be scared of being attacked somewhat, maybe more in the right-wing press, because they are anyway. They're being attacked for being useless as opposed to being effective in the interests of the overwhelming majority. And perhaps they should trade in being castigated for being useless at doing nothing instead of being moderately effective at doing something.
Paul, what do you think? Because James, as he told us, he has 16 days left to survive. So crucial 16 days to come. What does Keir Starmer need to do in the following days in order to survive this political turmoil?
Well, I dispute the characterisation of the time frame, because I don't think anyone is expecting Labour to do well in the Gorton and Denton by-election, although you never know. I mean, people on the ground are saying it's not as stark as some as the commentary suggests. But, I mean, you know, governing parties lose by-elections mid-term, and that is a sort of iron rule. Very rarely is that rule not is broken. So, you know, I think that's priced in, basically. I think we know that the Labour candidate is probably not going to get over the line, alas. So I don't think that is crisis moment at all. And I think there's another set of elections as well. And then, you know, into the conference season. I mean, once this week is over, the MPs go off to recess. So a lot of the plotting and scheming is dissipated as they go back to their constituencies. And then he'll have a reshuffle, and there'll be some new faces in the British cabinet. Maybe some of the troublemakers will be promoted up into government to shut them up, and maybe others will be sidelined, you know, so there'll be a movement within the parliamentary party that may be to his advantage as well. So I think he's got, you know, plenty of gas left in the tank, actually. And then we have the conference season coming up where he can deliver a brilliant speech and get the whole show back on the road. So I don't think it is a crisis moment. I mean, like I say, none of us is clairvoyant. And in politics, the only thing I've learned is you can't really predict the future because it is so unpredictable. But that would be my best guess, is that he's in a safer position. And
he may not be clairvoyant.
Paul,
we may not be clairvoyant, but I'm sure all of us have spoken to Labour MPs, and my assessment of Labour MPs' blood pressure is not that they will be completely relaxed. They will be, you know, laid back, horizontal in calmness, losing a by-election in an incredibly safe Labour seat where the Labour candidate got more than 55% of the vote at the last election. I think if you start setting the bar so low that safe seats, very, very safe seats, are just going to be lost, then I think you're saying there's no way back. I think even if they do lose, he needs to have a story about how they're turning the tide and that this is a message, not, oh yeah, we lost to Reform or the Greens, and, you know, yes, that's just sort of the thing that happens in governments. Governments are really unpopular, because then you look like you're not taking seriously the fact that this is a historically unpopular government. And to go from, I mean, okay, fine, only 33 or 34% of the vote at the last general election, a bit of a loveless landslide, but still to half your vote in 18 months, coming on the back of an historically, and deservedly so, historically unpopular 14 years of Conservative government, is not something that I think any MPs can just sit there calmly about.
Well,
you
just
can't
on the
actually be
by-election,
calm.
if I may,
Calm.
I mean, don't forget why we're having a by-election is because the candidate, the MP that was elected, was wishing death on some of his constituents via WhatsApp. And so he had to resign in disgrace and scandal. And that's not the most auspicious backdrop to fight an election and say, well, here's another candidate for you to consider. And I can understand why electors in that particular seat, in this particular circumstance, might decide to vote for another party. Of course, Labour MPs are not comatose about anything. I mean, they are lively and, intrigue and all the rest of it. But they have spent the weekend in their constituencies. And the ones I have spoken to, maybe, let's say a dozen, spent time at coffee mornings and on surgeries, talking to local voters and knocking on doors, maybe even campaigning in Manchester. And they've come back with a kind of sanguine view that a leadership contest and the sort of inward-looking nonsense and internecine scrap that would involve is pretty much the last thing the British voters want. So that's why I think that the big sort of shows of support we saw on Monday night and going into this week, I think is because they've spoken to voters and they've had their assumptions tested a bit by the cold splash of reality.
John, I believe you had something to say a bit earlier.
Yeah, look, I mean, picking up on what Paul and James have been saying, first thing is democracy is never a nonsense, and Paul shouldn't be calling democracy, a democratic ballot for the leadership of the Labour Party, a nonsense. It's never a nonsense. The party needs to be democratic. And that is linked to another thing, which is if we lose the Denton and Gorton by-election, which seems likely, we'll lose it because the Labour leadership decided to block the most popular Labour politician in the country, the entire country, from standing. That was their choice. It was foolish. It was foolhardy. It was vindictive. And that's the situation that, in one sense, triggered the crisis we're now in. It's the overreach. The Labour Party, National Executive Committee, is meant to look after the future of the Labour Party. You're meant to choose popular candidates. You're not meant to block them or bar them for made-up reasons. And I think there's the danger is, I agree with Paul that the backbenchers are sanguine, but I agree with James that no one is going to be happy if Labour lose either to Reform or to the Green Party in the by-election, because both of those send signals about the future coalition Labour needs to build. And the future coalition Labour needs to build is built firmly on urban voters, and just the kind of voters you get in this by-election, urban voters who are people of colour, urban voters who have concerns about Labour's position regarding Gaza and Palestine, Labour voters who are under 40, Labour voters who are graduates, Labour voters who are university educated, white-collar professionals. Labour's core vote is going to vote in this by-election. That's why it used to be a safe seat. For us to lose our core vote is chilling. For us to lose our core vote to the Greens is displacing the support for progressive policies to a completely different party, an upstart party, as we were 100 years ago when we took over from the Liberal Party, or we lose to Reform. And the choice of a contest with Reform at the next general election is a contest that's existential for the nature of our country, the nature of our democracy. So these aren't little things, and it's why I don't think you should ever think of inner party democracy as some small thing. This is a big thing because it matters for the government, which means it matters for the country.
Because James, what do you think?
So we don't want it happening every week, do we? I mean, the Tories tried lots of internal party democracy when they kind of kept changing leader every few months, but it did them absolutely no good whatsoever because the country felt they were not focused on their interests. And we can read, I mean, I would just a word of warning for all of us, really, which is we can read an awful lot into a by-election result, but they are almost always a product of very local factors and a moment in time. And don't forget, with the Runcorn by-election, which was obviously a victory for Reform, Labour only lost that by 6 votes. I mean, that's somebody stuck in a traffic jam, isn't it? A carload of voters went the wrong way down a side street. I mean, the other way, it would have been a triumph for Starmer, the comeback kid. He won the by-election in Runcorn. So it's very fine margins on these things, and we then extrapolate that result and try and glean great meaning from it. If Labour were to lose to the Greens or Reform, I don't think it presages anything more than it was a one-off result.
Because, James, what do you think? We're touching a lot on the Gordon and Denton by-election that is in 3 weeks. This, as John said, was a core vote for Labour, but now analysts are saying that this is a 3-way race between the Greens, Reform and Labour. So what does this say about where the British voter is at right now?
Well, Labour under Keir Starmer, has had contempt for substantial sections of its voters, well laid out, I think, by John in the previous segment, which is continuing the Mandelson policy. Mandelson famously said in the 90s that Labour's core voters, the working class, had nowhere else to go. And then they did. They stopped voting for the party, and that's been one of the major secular factors that's happened over the last 30 years. And we're seeing it again under Keir Starmer's leadership, perhaps substantially driven by the so-called strategy of Morgan McSweeney, who's now gone, but to have absolute contempt for big swathes of progressive voters who, on many, many issues, represent the overwhelming majority of people. I mean, if you look at things that I was talking about before, like a wealth tax, like public ownership of utilities, like scrapping the House of Lords, like banning MPs with second jobs, all these sorts of things. These are things that, yes, progressive-minded voters might care the most about, but they have between 75 and 85% support in the public. And if that by-election shows that Labour is being replaced in the minds of progressive voters around the country by the Green Party, that's actually existential. That's an existential threat to the survival of the Labour Party as a dominant party. I think in an analogue way to, as John suggested, to the emergence of the Labour Party overtaking the Liberal Party more than 100 years ago. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen. We don't have a crystal ball. But if you were to want that to happen, then you should do every single thing that Keir Starmer has done under his leadership. He's made it the most likely that it could be that such a thing could happen. Now, if he and those around him don't want that sort of thing to happen, then they need to have a political reset, not just a personnel reset, not just a cabinet reshuffle or something like that, which, to be honest, no one cares about. People care about the policies that are coming out the other side. And again, who are you picking fights with? Politics is about who is on one side and who is on the other side. Labour had a few things in the government, about a month ago. It started the year not too badly. It looked like it was going to face down Elon Musk and X over those disgusting Grok AI images of children and predominantly of women. And I think where they do those things, where they're picking a fight, where they're on the side of the overwhelming majority of people, then you start to look like a government for the people rather than what they have looked like, I'm afraid, since they've come in, which is basically a continuity of the previous government, already exhausted, already mumbling on about delivery without showing any real changes.
So now we're going to move on to our another segment. Keir Starmer, as we've mentioned, is in trouble. His party are around 20% in the polls, and regional elections in May are looming. There's now open speculation about who could succeed him, but no one seems to want to lead as the party heads into local elections. The Conservative Party changed leaders 4 times since 2016, and that didn't seem to solve their problems. Or the country's either. So, John, in public, the full cabinet rallied behind the Prime Minister through the turmoil, through potential leadership rivals, including Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting, who appear to be readying for a future contest. Is a change of leadership the solution to the Labour Party's current problems?
Look, I think I made clear in everything I've said in this discussion, but also in things I've written in other places and said in other places. The Labour Party's not unpopular because of its leader. It's unpopular because of its politics. It needs to sort the politics, and the politics has to be, as James said it, who are you for, who are you against? And there's good reasons why Nigel Farage, for example, is outflanking Labour to the left on nationalisation, on workers' rights, on other issues. He wants to be the workers' friend. Why? Because actually, a more red-toothed social democracy, intervention, state lead, government leading, government shaping the economy is actually what people want. And there's a whole range of ways in which I think I support the government shaping that I don't think James is particularly in favour of. I think the increase in defence spending is right. That could be the core of an industrial strategy. But Labour doesn't seem to want to make an argument about who it's for and who it's against. In the last budget, it dodged the issue of whether it should raise taxes on banks. There's at least a few £1 billion knocking around that could be taken from banks. Why do we not take money from banks? Well, I can't see people going out in the streets and saying, leave my bank alone. My bank is fairly taxed already. And I think it's that sense of drama as well as storytelling, that sense of enemies as well as people you fight for, that sense. Politics is in the end a contact sport. It's not a debating society. Arguments have to be won by any means necessary. And I think that is the issue at the moment. The cabinet, quite rightly, are giving space to the Prime Minister, who's got a mandate, massive majority, and he's got a manifesto, a programme that he could be implementing. Some of those big ideas are running into the sands. We're not going to build enough houses unless the government decides the government's going to build them by owning new towns and by giving councils the ability to build 500,000 council houses. That's the reality. The bones of government and its strategy have to change. The way it tells stories has to change, because in the end, it's got to realise that politics is a fight for some people and against other people. And that's the nature of it. And only through that kind of, I think, ideological resetting, not personnel resetting. It's, as Tony Benn, the famous former Labour cabinet minister, said, it's not the personality, it's the issues. Get the issues right by going back to the manifesto and doing the radical things that Labour got a mandate for. And some of those things have immediate impact, some have long-term impact, but they all have impact.
So I'm hearing that the general consensus here is that it's not about the leadership, it's more about the policies, lots of unpopular U-turns that this government has taken as well. So after a turbulent period, this question is for you, Paul, for Labour. What do you believe needs to be the policy changes that will put this party back on the winning path?
I mean, some of the so-called U-turns, of course, are actually quite popular. So, putting more money in people's pockets in various ways. It's the optics and the ramp up to it that was the disaster, but actually often has come out with the solutions probably better. I mean, the thing we haven't discussed at all, and yet will be being discussed in the pubs and clubs of the UK this weekend, is immigration, and particularly illegal immigration, and the crisis on the southern border, where we have the small boats crisis. Now, it's been dissipated recently because of mostly the weather, I have to say, but a government that goes into the next election that hasn't tackled that crisis and hasn't tackled the scumbags who are putting vulnerable people on boats and sending them across the English Channel in freezing conditions, does not deserve to be re-elected. So actually, yes, it'd be nice to have a nationalised water industry, but I don't think that's the thing that's animating the public discourse right now. I think it's this security risk and this sense of a government being absolutely out of control. And that what that does, of course, is fuel populism. We've seen big demonstrations on the streets. We've seen people really manipulating public opinion, particularly through social media, but also with real terms, real-time influence on streets, big demos, people flying flags and all this stuff. If that's the backdrop to the next election in 3 years, then Labour really is toast.
James, what do you think here?
Does that mean that we're going to...
Go ahead.
So this is my problem that I find often with people. I mean, although John is historically on the right of the party as well, but on the right of the Labour Party. I mean, all the things that we said that, John and I have laid out some slightly different things, but all of those things, you could carry on wanging on endlessly about migration, which the government does anyway. It's not like what the government has done, which is drive up the salience of the issue, adopt reforms rhetoric, and also hugely reduce net migration. It's down from about 1 million 3 years ago to around 200,000. And yet the issue hasn't come off the boil, because it's not really the fundamental issue. It's not really about the reality of the question. It's how it's presented in the media. So you can carry on chasing reform. Fine. OK. I disagree with that, but you can think that continues to be the sensible strategy. What are the other things that maybe some other people might care about that might give that fight that you're having some real distinction? Because at the moment you're saying it would be so terrible if reform won. They're so awful. They're so nasty. They divide people so much. P.S. We're going to basically say and do everything the same as them, but some of our people will look a bit embarrassed as they say it. If you really wanted to do the Shabana Mahmood argument and say the only way to defeat them is by copying them somewhat, then show what are the other things that you're going to do. Say, OK, fine, you may not like that, but you're going to have a green industrial strategy. We're going to own our water and our energy. that we're going to stop the wealth of the super rich soaring quite so far away. We're going to ban corruption in politics by taking away MP second jobs, and so on and so forth. We're going to allow councils to build homes. We're going to start a public housing bank that's going to lend to build homes for social rent, and so on and so forth. Okay, fine. Then you can do your anti-migrant thing as well. But then if Labour does okay at the next election, I wonder what the thing people will really notice. Probably that their bills are lower and that it's easier to get a house for their kids.
What do you think, Paul? Policy Talk. What needs to change here?
Well, we do need to ramp up the action in the channel and stop these horrific crossings from taking place. And I think once that's off the public agenda, it makes things much easier to win the arguments about some of these other things. I do accept absolutely, by the way, though, if you've got more money in your pocket and you feel a bit more secure about your future and you've got a affordable home and services that work and there's no potholes, you are less likely to fixate on small boat crossings as being the source of your ills and blaming migrants, legal or illegal. There is a sort of vortex into which that issue is sucked. But I do think that the crisis is genuine because thousands of people are coming over on boats, and it is. For me, it's a question of humanity because those crossings are incredibly dangerous, and it is really nasty people in Europe who are benefiting. These gangs who are benefiting from that, and the government has to tackle it. And it's not about chasing reform or capitalising on it. But for us, it should be about, for Labour, it should be about basic issues of decency and security, which is a strong pitch in the election.
So if you wanted
I would turn to my theme though, which is growth. I said at the start of our programme, the government should be judged on that above all else, because without growth in the economy, there is no social democratic programme. You can't redistribute power. You can't put more money in people's pockets. You can't boost the high streets and all the things we want to do, and tackle poverty, of course, as the central aim of a Labour government without growth in the economy. So my concern would be to see policies that start to deliver that faster, not least because I think we're now midterm. And we are running out of road. But, maybe we look back to where we began. Would a different leader suddenly have a different policy? Probably not. And therefore, we need to just fixate on growth as being the answer to all of this under whichever leader. And I return to my theme, which is probably more likely to be Keir Starmer than anyone else.
Paul, don't neglect the obvious. There's a simple solution for growth, and there's a simple solution for better management of irregular migration, and that is getting closer to the European Union. An EU-wide agreement on irregular migration would mean that we took our fair share of genuine refugees and that we were assisted in a process of actually returning people who don't gain asylum by going through our system. A fair and fast asylum process is our duty to the rest of the world. And getting close to the European Union, also by getting closer in many, many ways to the single market, maybe even rejoining the single market, would be an instant catalyst for growth. There's times at which it seems as though the government has got the attitude they'd do anything for growth. But if you say to them, I've got this one idea that would give us 4% extra GDP in one go, and they go, okay, I'll buy that. What is it? And you say, well, rejoin the single market. They go, I won't do that. And so we can't be the I'll do anything for growth, but not that party. We've got to be willing to look at all the ways in which
the politics does weigh in here too, though, doesn't it? Which I think would be considered still at this stage. We haven't won the argument for that, I would say, and I don't think there is necessarily a sort of easy route by doing that. But you mentioned, John, earlier defence spending, and I think that is another important factor in growth. Of course, the primary desire for increasing our defence expenditure is to defend ourselves in a very unstable year where the Russians are testing our defences daily. So it's important for that reason. But of course, we know from history that if you spend more money on defence, it does have a growth impacts, and more young people going into the armed services is a good thing. There's obviously supply companies up and down the supply chain that will benefit, and they tend to be well-paid, unionised jobs in the manufacturing sector and so on. So this might be a Labour government that is part of a rearmament of Europe, which will boost growth as a helpful, side benefit of it, which does get us into a place that at the next election we can show to people that we are boosting the economy too. But as I say, it's the right thing to do in its own terms, but it does have that useful benefit as well. And somebody like John Healey, who is in the cabinet as Defence Secretary, absolutely gets that, I think, and is making that argument within government and to the country in ways that people do find attractive, and it is something that the public will buy.
And James, I'm curious.
Defence as a sector has. Sorry, go on.
Go on.
Defence as a sector has probably the lowest possible multiplier effect that you could be ploughing money in your industrial strategy into, and the highest possible cost per job. A huge amount of the money won't stay in Britain at all. It will go out to in huge contracts to US weapons companies. The value for money is absolutely appalling if you look at what we've got from Trident or from the F-35s, for example, huge overruns. And that's not huge overruns of spending that goes into our economy. The most recent announcements that were made by John Healey last year had the cost was something like between £3 and £6 million per job. Now, what if we put that money instead into a programme of building social housing? That would, I think, have a far larger economic impact. You'd have more of the money going round in our economy. We'd build up the skills of way more people and employ more people. It'd have a much more positive economic impact. And also it wouldn't continue to, as so much of our economy is structured, leach out more and more money to major US multinationals. In this case, weapons companies.
Yeah, and the Russians would invade Estonia.
And
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, and the Russians will then invade Estonia.
The Russians will invade Estonia because we don't boost the profits of the US multinational companies, because Donald Trump wants to sell out Ukraine by dismembering it and taking its resources. Oh, right. Yes. No, I understand. Yes. No, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. This establishment position, which has captured a huge, basically all of our political media class, that we just simply have to rely on the US and keep the only thing that is sensible and grown up is keep on pummeling them with as much of our money as we possibly can, is completely ludicrous. It's not good for our security, it's not good for our safety, and it's certainly not good for our economy. Instead, we should be putting that money into things which do have benefit for us.
And that leads me to my next question, John, because here we're talking a lot about policies, unpopular or popular. We're talking about defense, immigration, Russia, Ukraine. So do you think that all of these policy changes and also the Mandelson crisis, could this finally give more credibility to alternative parties now, such as the Greens under Zach Polanski or Reform UK with Nigel Farage?
We're in a paradoxical moment, aren't we? We're in a situation where Reform look as though they are the dominant party in British politics, yet they only have the support of around 30% of the population, which is the support that has always been there for the electoral vehicle that Nigel Farage has. He looks big because the rest of the parties are small. We've now got five-party politics. In five-party politics, 21% is a plurality. In multi-candidate seats where the different parties are competitive, those votes can splinter everywhere. But if you look at the blocks in politics, there's two blocks, and both blocks, the right bloc and the left bloc, have got insurgent populist parties. Now, that is actually how politics is meant to work. Politics is not a duopoly. Politics is a battle of ideas. I think it comes back to what we've been discussing. If Labour is encouraged by the challenge of the Greens to have better progressive policies and implement them better, that is a good thing, because it is a flaw in the thinking of Zach Polanski that the UK could and should leave NATO and would be secure. It's a flaw in Zach Polanski's thinking that Britain could or should not have the next generation of carbon neutral power in nuclear power stations. And so there's very practical ways to fight that. But let's understand that the voters who are considering Reform and who are considering Green, and you see in the focus groups, in the by-election, Denton Gorton by-election. Some of them are looking at the same way. Should I go green or should I go reform? It's because they think the current system isn't working, and they're not wrong. It's because they think things should change, and they're not wrong about that. That's an energy out there, and if the mainstream parties, and I mean particularly the Labour Party, if Labour can't capture that energy, that anger and that energy, and channel it towards, no, look, there's protest and there's progress. And we're the party of progress, not the party of protest. We're the party that is going to, I hope, one day a Labour government will actually reinstate HS2. This country, where railways came from, should not be scared to build a railway for the 21st century. We need a bit of boldness and swagger in progressive politics, and actually to say, look, I'm happy for debate about ideas. I think our ideas are better than the Greens. I think our ideas are better than reforms. And I think that at the next election, the battle will be over some very, very serious things about leaving the EHRC, abandoning human rights protection for British citizens. These aren't small things. The battle at the next election will be big. It'll be a big choice. And the key question in the end is who helps Labour build the electoral coalition it needs in 2028 or 2029, and which policies build towards that, not who's up, who's down at the moment.
That's all we have time for, I'm afraid. And we want to thank you all for your contribution today and hope we can have you on again as further developments take course. Joining us for this discussion was Paul Richards, a Labour Party prospective parliamentary candidate, John McTernan, political strategist who was former political director for Prime Minister Tony Blair, and James Schneider, communications director for Progressive International and also a former advisor to then Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you all for joining us here at Counterpoints. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Counterpoints. To keep up to date with our latest debates and interviews, be sure to subscribe to Arabiya English on YouTube, and don't forget to follow us on X and TikTok. Goodbye.